Oh my God, there's a new podcast. It's By-Electioncast. It's Laura in the studio.
Paddy in the studio.
It's Joe Pike in the studio.
And hello to Luke Tryl.
Great to be with you.
Very nice to have you here. So, before we get into Makerfield or Breakerfield, another excuse to say, and I'm really intrigued to hear what you guys found when you were there. I haven't been, so I really want to hear what you found. And I'm going to get busy also reading all the transcripts from all the focus groups that you've done, because it's really important to hear about that. But let's look at the numbers that we have on the possible ways where people are going to vote. Luke Tryl.
Yeah, so we did a constituency poll over the past couple of weeks. So that's asking people in Makerfield how they would vote in a by-election. We spoke to around 500 people, which is about standard for that type of poll. And what we found was that Andy Burnham got 45% of the vote. Robert Kenyon was just 5 points behind. He's the Reform candidate on 40%. But interestingly, Rebecca Shepherd, the Restore Britain candidate, that party led by Rupert Lowe, was on 8%. So in fact, the Restore vote share was bigger than the gap between Labour and Reform. The Greens, the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats all under 5%, so not keeping their deposit there. And the other thing that we found is even at this stage in the contest, around 1 in 8 voters still hadn't made up their mind. And they're not people who might sit it out. They were people who said, I'm going to vote, but I still haven't decided how. So, there's a big margin of error on a poll like that. Lots of undecided, a close race, Restore, their vote bigger than the gap. So, basically lots to play for in the final week.
So interesting for lots of reasons, but just apart from anything else, a few weeks ago, I think we talked about Restore a little bit. And if you haven't been following this closely, Restore are a party on the right of Reform who came about because their leader, Rupert Lowe, had a big fallout with Nigel Farage. And until really recently, whenever we were talking about it, they're kind of an online creation, really. But we're seeing here a sort of online froth and excitement in particular bits of the internet actually turn into something that might be a party that gets lots and lots of real votes. Has that surprised you, Luke?
It has. And I think it points to something bigger than just Restore. I think it's a changing nature of our politics, actually, that the barriers to entry, social media has basically broken down the barriers to entry to what was essentially a one-man band political party, as you say, founded because Rupert Lowe fell out with Nigel Farage and Zia Youssef. But the interesting thing is, if you look at Rupert Lowe, he has about 1.2, 1.3 million Facebook followers. It's almost twice as many as the Prime Minister has got. And when you speak to people, it's on social media that they have heard about him. And that has allowed him to cut through. And certainly, both in the focus group and going around the constituency, there were Restore posters in the windows there. So they're clearly making an impact. I think they've got an action day today where I was reading, I think they've had about 500, 600, maybe 700 people on the ground in the constituency. Huge number there. So they are a real force.
So, Joe, you spent time sitting, listening, which is something that perhaps some dreadful members of the political media class don't do often enough. What were your reflections then being there?
Well, I mean, Luke was doing the chairing. I was sitting in the corner with a furrowed brow and a notepad, like a sort of, I don't know, an Ofsted inspector or a supply teacher or something, I don't know, sitting in the corner as Luke very carefully and warmly chaired a group of 8 people from different jobs, some retired, some in people in sort of logistics. We had an architect, a teacher, someone in aerospace. And what was interesting about how Luke sort of chaired this group, speaking over about an hour, was that he made an encouraging noise, whatever they said, trying to get people to be confident, to get their views out, and for every view to be expressed. And I think what was most interesting for me was that people were really engaged. The awareness of the candidates and the parties seemed pretty high to me, considering you vox pop people on the street and some people aren't really aware of politics or politicians at all. People had really engaged. I think the BBC Question Time programme, the fact you have a by-election where you have your own question time for an hour is a pretty amazing sort of televised hustings.
Basically, under our system, Makerfield is being its own parliament. And so what was said to me very eloquently was people in the north of England and in Scotland and in Wales, they look down at London and think that's what London does. London does all the sort of chattering bits that make the decisions. But actually, guess what? This is Makerfield who could pick the Prime Minister. So one woman put it really eloquently to me. She stopped Lem Sissy on the street, he's a poet, and she came up with 2 words or 1 hyphenated word, Laura, for what it feels like to be a voter right now in the Makerfield constituency.
Hello, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, I'm from the Ashton Grammar School before it was Birchall.
Okay,
So-
I was the first year of Birchall
Yeah,
High School.
yeah, good to see you.
Oh, lovely.
We're here because your Makerfield's in the middle of the news. Are you
Yes.
fed up with it as kind of living here?
I'm not fed up with it. I'm quite excited by the buzz, but it's quite a burden privilege to be able to vote at this time and needs to be taken seriously.
That's a poetic word, Lem. That's your job.
Oh, it's beautiful. Burden privilege. Gorgeous.
It's really interesting, that, isn't it? I mean, forget Iowa in the States. The primary's all over there. I mean, this is an extraordinary thing, actually, by any measure. A by-election where a man who we know wants to be the Prime Minister is trying to get his way back to Parliament, who will probably, at some point, if he wins, maybe quite quickly say, all right, Keir, jobs are good and I managed to win a by-election. If he does, see you later.
Everyone was talking about leaflets as well, Laura. I mean, we had people
Love a
who said
leaflet.
if I'd been on holiday for 2 weeks, I'd have come back. I wouldn't have been able to open my front door. Another woman who likened the situation she was facing to the scene in Harry Potter in the first film or book, where all those letters from Hogwarts arrive and sort of a pile of letters appear before him, just because there'd be multiple leaflets a day. And some of them were actually quite frustrated by that, saying, yeah, I'll read the first couple. I'm not going to read, the 15th. And there were people who found it exciting and, yes, a privilege, but others who were slightly suspicious of all these, not just politicians, but political campaigners that were suddenly knocking on their door, caring about your community. One woman said, I've been living this area for 5 years. No one's ever done that before. Why are they only coming now? It's because they want something different.
And Paddy, you were there. What was your impression? You've got many years' experience of just turning up in a place with your microphone, trying to get a sense of what's on people's minds.
So there are 11 wards in Makerfield, and Luke and I were talking about the fact that actually among the outer parts of the constituency, which is about, 76,000, is it? People feel that Ashton's hogged quite a lot of the limelight. And
Right.
that's a reminder, actually, that where you live is where you live. And all people like us swooping in, do we know the difference? Do we just come from Wigan on the train? And then do we pass through a constituency which has its own issue? The library has closed down and there's a campaign to get it open again in Ashton. Are we talking about that? So I would say what I really feel is that people are faced with an important vote and they are aware of its moment in time. It's not like they all want us to go away. They're aware, Luke. Did you find yourself that they know they've got an important cross on the paper?
Well, exactly. And to sort of build on what Joe was saying, I have never found this level of political engagement or awareness in a by-election.
Right.
He's, because we focus group most by-elections, not quite as much as we've done in Makerfield, and most of the time people won't be able to name the candidates. Most of the time people are like, I might vote, I might not vote, and that's obviously reflected in the turnout for these
Sure.
by-elections. Right?
Because they tend to be lower than at a general election. Yeah.
This is totally different. People have views on the candidates, and you've also got, and actually I think in a slightly unhealthy way, I think a degree of disengagement is, is usually a sign that people are broadly content, whereas at the moment you've got people playing sort of 3D chess, people who aren't ordinarily in politics. One guy said, look, I would never vote Labour normally, but I know I can't get Labour out in the next few years, but I can get Keir Starmer out if I vote Labour this time. But I had someone else in another group who said basically the entire opposite of that. She said, I love Keir Starmer. I think she was the only one we found, but she said, I love Keir Starmer and I'm prepared to have a dud MP in Robert Kenyon, because she was a Labour supporter, rather than a dud Prime Minister. So she was going to tactically vote Reform to help Keir Starmer. I mean, as I say, she was the only one like that. But you've got, people who basically don't engage in politics really thinking this through. And I think in general, most people kind of welcome the kind of privilege of being able to pick this and think it's very important and think there's going to be a change. But at the same time, there is a feeling, and I've heard from more than one person, Friday the 19th of June, does the circus just pack up and are we just, forgotten about again, either because Andy Burnham becomes Prime Minister, doesn't come back, or Robert Kenyon is just a backbench MP?
Shall we three commit to going back within 3, 6, 9 months? Should we not be those people? Should we do the same thing all over again?
Definitely. I mean, it's certainly good for scrutiny, whoever wins the by-election.
Because we hardly ever talk about Josh Simons anymore, do we? I mean,
And he was the MP.
he was the
until fairly
MP who
recently,
said,
the
"Oh,
one-
here's the thing: you can have my seat, Andy Burnham. That's how our system works." Well, if he wins it, but
The weird thing is, and again, this is another quirk of this by-election. Almost every focus group I've done, people have had good things to say about Josh Simons. Again, I've done tons of focus groups in Labour's 2024 intake seats. Basically, none of them know who their MP is, and that's fine, that's normal. But the weird thing is, you do focus groups in Makerfield, people are like, well, Josh did this, Josh did that, Josh did this. I actually slightly wondered afterwards whether he was slightly ruining giving up his seat, because he was clearly quite popular there.
That's really interesting, because lots of people, for absolutely understandable reasons, don't know who their MP is. And if they do know who their MP is, they might not be very impressed by them.
So are we predicting a big turnout?
I would be surprised if this wasn't at the upper end for a by-election, given the stakes, given the ground game.
And what would you put that at for newscasters? An upper end of a by-election? 40, 50?
Well, turnout in the general election was, I think, 52.5. So in that seat.
In that seat, right. Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if it surpassed that.
Very interesting. Well,
We love a prediction.
We love a prediction. And also we love an overnight programme. And there'll be a special overnight programme on Makerfield on Thursday. And we'll be on air till we know the result.
So let's just turn to voters. You had a focus group. You asked a series of questions. Where should we start, Joe? You were the chief monitor.
Chief monitor.
Chief monitor.
Supply teacher,
Pencil
he
monitor.
said.
Where would you start us off in the Makerfield focus group?
I think the one thing that everybody in the group agreed on was having some form of scepticism about Keir Starmer. So these people were not saying necessarily you think he's a bad person or he has bad intentions, but the phrases or the words, the language that came up a lot were he's not charismatic, he's not a leader. Someone said he's a middle manager, over promoted, and there was just this pretty relentless negativity about his leadership, and in particular also awareness about what had happened this week and John Healey's resignation as the Defence Secretary.
I think he has the best intent. I have a son in the army. I have a big interest in this. And I think he's done the right thing. However, that's the worry for me is that we're going to go through this period of turmoil in this dangerous period.
So that when he says he means Healey's done the right thing.
He was supportive of Healey's decision to jump over defence funding. And you, Laura, have been digging into all of this.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a piece on the website which we got some new details about what happened, because there is nothing worse for a Prime Minister who's put your safety and security at the top of the list to have his Defence Secretary, who basically everybody kind of likes in Westminster, which is very unusual, to say, you're making us less safe with your decisions here. So what I'm told is on Tuesday, John Healey and the MOD went to see Downing Street and said, this is not enough. This is not okay. We're not going to be able to do this figure. And the figure was bouncing between 10 billion, 13.5 billion and 15 billion, literally depending which way you counted it. But the MOD and Healey were incredibly unhappy. On Wednesday, John Healey had a conversation with Keir Starmer about it and basically said, up with this, I cannot put. They had a late night call where I'm told that John Healey said, I will quit if you go ahead with this, if you don't budge. Recollections then vary slightly. So Healey's camp suggests that Keir Starmer kind of said, OK, well, let's both think about it overnight. Number 10's camp say Starmer was clear that was his final decision and he wasn't going to budge. However, then on Thursday morning, John Healey didn't hear anything more. He'd been expecting and trying to get back some more feedback from Downing Street. But by mid-morning, managed to get one of the political team on the phone, not Keir Starmer himself, but one of his team told him the Prime Minister wasn't budging and Healey's path and resignation was then set. But there's a lot of interesting background to this. And I think from talking to defence sources and people kind of around the place, and you and I have talked a lot about defence spending, actually, haven't we, at Weekend Newscasts? The rot set in, as it was put to me, not just when the Prime Minister made that promise of extra funding at the NATO summit, was actually when the Strategic Defence Review, the big piece, was done anyway. I was told that John Healey, although everybody likes him, it was suggested to me that he'd never really sort of fully absorbed that actually the money allocated in that review was never going to be enough anyway. And when the Prime Minister then made his commitment to NATO allies of even more cash for defence, that black hole, if you like, had got even bigger. So it was a sort of a double problem. And John Healey's other mistake was suggested to me was that he told the Prime Minister and the Chancellor that he would not go back to them for any more cash when the defence review was settled. But then just a few months later, he went back to them and said, I'm going to need more money. So this whole thing was a complete mess, and but it's been a mess for quite a long time. Still, though, people are staggered that John Healey, of all people, actually walked. And it says something quite bad about the political handling of Downing Street, that you actually managed to lose somebody so loyal, so well respected, and on an issue of principle. And I think it sowed all sorts of really bad problems. I also think if Keir Starmer was likely to be there for more than a few months, they're going to end up, as one senior figure said to me, they're going to have to do a U-turn on this because the plan as is not credible, according to that source. Anyway, let's go back to Makerfield because I could wang on about that for far too long.
No, really, really interesting. In Makerfield, we also spoke, or Luke helped us elicit viewpoints on the different candidates. As we say, high awareness of the different candidates. In particular, on Andy Burnham, of course, who seems to be at the centre in many ways of this contest. And I suppose on Andy Burnham, the views of the focus group attendees on his intentions really varied.
I do kind of feel that he's seen an opportunity, he's taken it, whether it works out for him, don't know, a week's time will tell.
I totally agree with what you say. He's an opportunist.
There's been a lot of talk about he's going just for Prime Minister and that the locals won't see him ever again. Like he disappears down to Downing Street, never to be seen again. I don't believe that's the case. I do believe he is passionate about the people and the area.
I think he's done a lot for the Manchester as such, but not so much for the fringes like ourselves.
How do you think he'd do as an MP?
I think he's charismatic, but I think he's saying a lot. I'd like to know what he's actually going to do.
So interesting, the opportunist angle there. Is that like saying I won't vote for him? Is that the same as saying I won't vote for him? Can you vote for him and think he's an opportunist?
Yeah, I mean, there were certainly some people who did think that, saying what's the problem with a politician who's ambitious, and they're all like this. They're all thinking about themselves in some way.
Yeah, and again, this has been fairly consistent across the conversations we've been having with voters. There's a group who think opportunist and I don't like it. Mm-hmm. There's a group who think opportunist and I do like it, and there's a group who think no, I just think he's genuine and wants to do that's it. And that is about the one thing that I would say, and I don't think enough people have taken this into account, but I can say quite confidently, I don't normally make predictions, but if Andy Burnham were not the candidate, this would not be a close race. Right, he clearly has the sort of personal vote that you don't really see in politics anymore. In fact, in that constituency poll, we also asked people about the favourability of different figures. And think of this contrast. Keir Starmer's favourability in Makerfield was net minus 48. Mm-hmm. Andy Burnham's is plus 7.
Wow.
So it's a 55-point net gap there. And actually, even to be positive, I keep saying this to people, even to be positive in our current era of anti-politics, it just doesn't happen anymore. So he's clearly got something, but he's fighting against those who don't like the opportunism and the fact that, demographically, this is right up there on Reform's target list.
But it's interesting because if he wins, and it's still an if, and the polling, you've told us about some of your polling, but the polling's pretty limited. Constituency polls can be quite sort of wacko. The numbers are small. There's still quite a few days left. Lots of undecideds, as you've told us. But that is exactly why, if he wins, Andy Burnham will be able to say to the Labour Party across the UK, look, I am the one who can stop a tidal wave. I am the one who can kill off, metaphorically, our biggest problem, which is Reform UK. I'm the man who can do it. I'm a winner, not in any old seat, but in a seat, as Luke's explained, that on paper in 2026 should be painted turquoise from top to bottom. And that, if he wins, I think will be the core of his political argument to his colleagues, is choose me, get Starmer out, or else you are going to get walloped.
There's the mo, isn't there? There's the till it happens, especially in politics, you don't know it's actually happened. It's the strength of it, isn't it? It's the emotional impact to an intellectual thing, which is kind of, I've detected, I've been away, as you was reminded, but the impact of the Healey resignation was emotional as well as it was intellectual. People went, oh, that just happened.
Completely. And a cabinet minister said everyone would be very shaken by it. That was their word, shaken. And within about half an hour of it happened, somebody sent a silly gift to my phone just of a load of dominoes being knocked over.
So
and but who knows what impact, and even the results. So let's just even be even more nerdy. If Burnham wins, if he wins by a big margin, he'll be held aloft. He'll be cheered all the way down by the Labour Party on the Avanti West Coast train. If he squeaks it and only just wins, the whole dynamic of his return to Westminster will take on a very different sheen. All of which good reasons to watch, of course, overnight on BBC One.
Second time I mentioned that. So let's talk about other candidates. Robert Kenyon, who is standing for Reform UK. Now, we'll ask you what voters said about him, alongside saying that quite a lot of his past has come back, remarks he may or may not have made or has made, how he characterises them now. So there's been a campaign he could have run on a clear Farage manifesto, but has also had incoming. But what did you find the voters said about this one man?
They, Paddy, were certainly aware of a lot of those past social media comments. Now, Robert Kenyon denies he is sexist, but it is the comments that some people interpret as sexist, which everyone in this focus group seemed to be really aware of, although they had, I suppose, different approaches to whether that mattered or not.
So, in other words, they're polling very strongly. So it's not the same as saying they're down with the Greens on 3%. They're still up there.
Reform, I mean, they're still doing, very well. They're, in that poll, they're within a whisker of taking the seat. What I would say is, again, I think you get a variety of camps when it comes to comments. Some people say, well, we all say silly things. If we saw everyone's social media history, we'd all be unemployable. You get another group who say, no, if those comments...
Speak for yourself.
Well, not everyone has to follow BBC codes. There's another group who say, no, if I did that in my job, I'd lose my job. And, interestingly, fathers of daughters, I've noticed, have been very amongst the group who are most kind of upset by it. And then you get another group who say, fine, you make mistakes. And I think this is the key group, and I think this is where Reform have made an error, who say, I understand people make those comments. Why hasn't he apologised for it? If he apologised, it would show that he'd learn. And I just wonder whether Reform have made a mistake in trying to learn. Again, I think Reform always make mistakes when they try and learn lessons from America, which don't translate here. Because obviously the Trump mantra, never apologise, plough forward, doesn't matter. Whereas actually British voters, an apology really matters to them. And I think if he'd done that, this would be less of an issue than it is now. But as you say, clearly not disqualifying. He's clearly going to do very well, even if he doesn't win next week.
Shall we have a listen to what people had to say about him?
First things we heard about is social media, and I think, wow. Sexist, despicable views about a lot of things. It makes me feel very uncomfortable.
Let me bring in Lizzie, because you look like you have a different point of view, and then we'll bring in...
Yeah, so I disagree. First off, on the comments that have come out about him, so some of these comments were made such a long time ago, and the issue we've got nowadays is the media, social media makes things sound so much worse. He's a local lad. He's a local plumber. He knows the area. He's from the area, and he's not overly ambitious like Andy.
He doesn't have a clue what he's doing. And in a way, I feel a tiny bit sorry for him because he's been put up there and he clearly can't handle it, but yet he's being left to flounder there.
People are so reasonable.
And quite sympathetic in different ways. Like, there weren't people really properly going for anyone. You have Jackie there was saying, I think he's had a really tough campaign and he hasn't been very good But there is empathy for the different politicians, a bit like we had around Starmer, people who didn't really like him, but were saying, look, I don't think he's a bad guy, he's having a tough time.
But also, it's going back to the earlier point about his charisma, he was partly voted for because he wasn't charismatic. Boris Johnson got them into that was one of his strengths at one point. But can we just go back to under the bonnet of polling? Do you invite me in to say, please come and talk about the Makerfield by-election, or do you keep it mysterious why I'm coming in?
Yeah, so this is really important. This is one of the most important things about focus groups, because people often assume that we kind of recruit them like a question time audience. Come and have your say about politics. And that is the opposite that we want, because people who like to talk about politics are weird, right? You know, they're unusual. So actually, well, no, I know. No,
You're quite right. Unusual.
Unusual.
Yeah.
And so the way that we do it is people are recruited for a focus group in the first instance, where they could be coming to talk about mouthwash or a new road safety campaign or politics. We obviously tell them then before, but only once they've been selected, that this is going to be a focus group about politics. And that is so important, because you don't just want really engaged people.
And certainly at the end of the focus group we did on Friday, we had some cameras, they're obviously filming it, and lots of microphones. And at the end, they were saying, so what are you, who are you, what's it being filmed for? Mm-hmm. So there was absolutely no awareness that they were going to be on BBC One at 10:05 explaining their views, even though, of course, they'd given sort of consent to be filmed. And that, in a way, meant that I think we got something that was far more honest and human, and wasn't people thinking, oh, I want to be on telly.
Yeah, because we're living in very tribal, polarised times, and this kind of echo chamber where you are wrong and you're not going to change my mind. So the idea that people are sort of happily milling around, talking to each other without knowing that they were going in to have to give a particular pitch is perhaps why they've got that generosity that you're talking about.
Yeah, maybe so. And I think also when you say, and partly you're being very self-effacing, that people who talk about politics are weird and unusual. That's true. But also I think that applies to capital P politics. I think if you think of politics as how good your kid's school is, whether or not there's potholes in your road, how much your energy bill is, who do you want your MP to be? Maybe not quite so much on that one. But I think actually that is a small P political conversation. And I always kind of slightly rail at, the side. Most people are not following Westminster or Holyrood or the Senate or what's happening in their local council obsessively in the way that we do. But small P politics is something everyone is engaged in. Maybe if they don't even kind of wouldn't describe it that way. Which is why those conversations that you lead, and I've seen loads of them, they're so important, because they actually they're that interface, that coalface between punters and politics, even though it's not, oh, did you see what happened at the select committee last Thursday weekend when somebody from the Department of Paperclips was really under pressure?
Really? Did that happen?
I know, it was so amazing. I'll tell you later. Whole podcast on it tomorrow.
But I'll add another letter to your P, which is W. My theory is, if you could make it work, you're going to get votes. If you can do it, take any doorstepable issue and say this broken thing, let's call it potholes, we're going to mend them. Mm-hmm. I think that generates votes. But no one's asking me my opinion, Luke.
No one's asking your opinion. No. Well, I mean, you could do a focus group with you in it. I think you might be a bit unusual. But the interesting thing is, at the end, the number of times I've done focus groups, and at the end, people have said, and I think this should be a lesson to politicians, the number of people have said, no one's ever asked me this stuff before. Exactly. I'm just, it's so nice to be asked and to talk about it. And, and as Joe saw, we had people on an issue like immigration, for instance, people had vastly different views in that focus group. There was, one gentleman, Andy, who thought it was the biggest challenge facing the country. There were others who, I think it was Karen, who had a very different view on immigration. Yet they were able to talk about it in a way which was quite far removed from what we often see. But because they had that space to do it, and I think we need more of those spaces.
It also shows you another currency in politics, which is the currency of showing up and asking people what they think.
He's been 8 times to Makerfield.
8 times. So what's changed in the time then? What has changed in people's mind? Has anything changed?
So I think a couple of things. So I think the question time actually was a moment. And again, to have, people who I suspect, do not tune into Question Time that regularly, so glued onto it. I think that was a moment. I think it did lead to some more questions about Kenyon for some people, less about the social media and more about the sort of readiness to do it, like you heard from Jackie in that clip. I think the Restore, presence has definitely sort of ticked up, but the broad contours have actually stayed pretty much the same throughout the contest. When we started and did our first focus group, the big issue that people were discussing basically was, do we want the Prime Minister as our constituency MP? And that was basically the same question that we heard this Friday.
It's going to be really, really, really fascinating. And I think in the Labour Party, the conversation, I don't know, Joe, if you've got anywhere with this in the last few days, I've been trying to ask people when I speak to them, what happens and what do you do if Andy Burnham doesn't win?
From conversations with Labour people this week, and this may be problematic if things don't go this way, but I've not met anyone in the Labour Party who thinks Andy Burnham is not going to win, and they haven't really considered that question you've just posed
a good one
about what on earth happens next.
Yeah.
And if he does win, there are a whole host of different people who have different theories about how quick and slow, whether there'll be a contest or coronation, whether Andy Burnham's leadership, if he were to win it, is continuity or change. All those dynamics are there. We should also say that we did mention other parties in the focus group. There were people talking positively about the Greens and their sort of radicalism, according to a couple of people. The Conservative candidate had gone down well. Luke asked people about the Liberal Democrats, and the sort of question was who, in a slightly jokey way, because they didn't seem to be that present. But also, as we've touched on, there was a high awareness of Rupert Lowe and his party Restore. That was something that had really cut through, and some people who would maybe otherwise have voted Reform certainly seemed tempted by Restore.
Rupert Lowe talks a lot of sense. You might not like him, you might not like his opinions, but for what he wants to do for the country and for the betterment of the people in it, I think is the way forward.
I have similar views on Restore as I have with Reform. I think Restore is just Reform on steroids.
Do I go Restore? Do I go Reform? Now, a lot of you are saying, well, I'm not voting Reform. So what you're effectively doing is saying, I'll have some more of what I've already had, and I don't like what I've already had.
So, lots to talk about in the next few days. It really could be, whatever happens, it will be a moment of history, but it might be a moment of profound history. The next Prime Minister of the country could be chosen on the stage alongside Count Binface. That would be a moment of British politics. Goodness me, Boaty but Boatface would have absolutely nothing on that. Traditionally, Paddy, the BBC, particularly on the wireless, you read out the candidate list, but Newscast has been doing something unusual to make that slightly more interesting than normal.
We have been going to favourite much-loved voices around broadcasting.
So you?
No, actually, no, certainly not. And here is a very surprising one.
Hey, Paddy, Laura, newscasters. It's Jeremy Vine here. Got to admit, I'm in my, I say garden, that's a bit of an exaggeration. It's got some grass and a tree and a bit of wind at the moment. So forgive me, I know it's not ideal, but I must read out the 14 candidates standing in the Makerfield by-election on Thursday the 18th of June, because this is the law, we have to do it. In alphabetical order, the candidates are Jake Austin, Liberal Democrats, Count Binface Party, Andy Burnham, the Labour Party, Dan Clark, the Libertarian Party, John Dyer, Independent, Ed Gemmell, Climate Party, Paul Gould, Independent, Alan Howlin, Lord Hope, the official monster raving loony party, Robert Kenyon, Reform UK, Robert Pownall, Independent, Rebecca Shepherd, Restore Britain, Sarah Wakefield, Green Party, Peter Ward, Rejoin EU, Michael Winstanley, Conservative. Got a little plane going overhead, which may be carrying campaigning leaflets there, I don't know. The same full list of candidates plus loads more information about Makerfield and the by-election is available on the BBC website. Hey, you guys, Laura, Paddy, can't wait to see you. Catch you later. I was just about to read the last thing on this. I can pop this over on email if you prefer. That was from your producer.
Of course, the wonderful, great, recognisable voice of the Vine. Jeremy Vine there helping us out with the candidate list. I've got to say, I love the wireless. I really, really do. But also on telly, you can just say, here's the list and move on. Anyway.
Who's on your sofa tomorrow?
Well, Lisa Nandy has the lucky ticket of coming up to speak for the government after a fairly terrible week and a tricky few days ahead. We'll also, and this might be on the news by the time you're watching this, we've been speaking to Ian Russell, of course, probably the most prominent online safety campaigner for children who lost his daughter Molly all those years ago. We've done a really interesting interview with Ian just in advance of the Prime Minister announcing what we think will be a social media ban for under-16s on Monday. And Ian tells us that it is deplorable, to use his word, if the Prime Minister is rushing into doing what he thinks is basically a sledgehammer to crack a nut. He thinks the government's going about this in the wrong way. But also he has revealed some research to us, which you can read about on the website probably by now, by the time you're listening to this, where essentially he says all the harmful content that Molly saw that contributed to her death is still out there. And research for his foundation has shown that half of girls are seeing harmful content every week. So we know that people care about this issue, and we'll be hearing more about that in the coming days.
You have followed that from the very beginnings of his campaign. We will talk about Belfast and the efforts to rehome people whose homes were torched by mobs. Welcome to the news cycle that we now live in. And we will cover a certain football match that happens at 2 a.m. between Haiti and Scotland.
And all will be revealed tomorrow. We've got our special own reporter at the match.
Are you going to stay up?
Well, I might almost be up anyway for the end of the match, because it starts at 2, doesn't it? And I normally get up at 4 on a Sunday. So if it goes to penalties, I mean, do I get up half an hour earlier to see the last minute?
Penalties in the first rounds? I don't know.
I don't know. You're looking at me and Paddy, and that is just not going to be a mistake.
I think the answer, I asked this in the office, the answer is no. But
I don't know. I mean, don't come home too soon. The tragic Scottish single from the last World Cup run. Answers on a postcard. Whose song was that?
Okay, Ali McLeish.
So rude. Delamitri, of course.
Oh, Delamitri. Right, Joe and Luke, you came in here with your serious work. And just sit through this.
Delamitri.
So we thank you very much for bringing us your the findings of all your 8 times to Makerfield, and Joe, your monitor role there in Makerfield. Please join Laura on the TV and me on Radio 4 tomorrow.
If you haven't lost the will to live already.
That's the end of By-Electioncast.
Thank goodness. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.